There's no doubt in my mind that we are making progress. And I know that a lot of people get frustrated for the slowness of how the implementation is taking place. But you have to remember that I think the severity of the issue that we have to fix is very deep. And it takes many levels of working with governments and with Canadians.
That was Governor General Mary Simon speaking to CTV's chief political correspondent Vassy Kapelos in an interview airing this weekend on CTV's Question Period. The interview touched on the government's progress in meeting the 94 calls to action as set out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission back in 2015. It comes ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is this coming Monday. The day honors the children who never returned home and the survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. The Liberal government has committed to meet all of those calls to action. So how far have they progressed? Well, earlier today, I spoke with the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Gary Anandasangaree. Minister Anandasangaree, welcome back to Power Play.
Glad to be back.
Now, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is often a time of reflection, not just on the work that each of us is doing in terms of reconciliation, but the work of government as well. So as the minister in charge of this, how would you assess your own government's progress?
Look, this is a very important day as we recognize and remember and really pay tribute to the survivors. I've been able to meet many of them over the last 14 months, but particularly in the days leading up to the National Day, I've had some very important conversations. Ultimately, they're at the center of this day. From a government perspective, we've made significant progress since 2015 on our path towards reconciliation. We have had a series of very important undertakings, including our work towards implementing the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, as well as the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirit individuals. Ultimately, reconciliation is a multi-generational journey. It took us 157 years to get here. It is going to take time for us to be in a place where we have truly reconciled. And I am quite content with the work that we've done, but with the full realization that we have a lot more to do, and that is what we're doing, and we will continue to do the work in partnership with Indigenous people.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would disagree with you that this will take multi-generations, but there's a number of organizations that are tracking the progress on those 94 calls to action as laid out by the TRC Commission report. Your own website actually has been down all day, so it's difficult to see what your own reporting has been. But the Assembly of First Nations says just one of those calls of actions has been found to be completed since June of 2023. Is that what you'd call good progress in the last year?
So just to put this in perspective, Mike, if you look at the 94 calls to action, there are several that are completely outside the purview of the federal government. There are many that are exclusive purview of the federal government. Some are mixed jurisdiction with the province. So according to our records, 80% of the calls to action that either are exclusive to the federal government or shared jurisdiction, we have progressed on. But I can give you a perfect example. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is something that the calls to action TRC has called upon to first of all to accept and then to implement. We brought forward legislation in 2021, and it passed in accepting and putting UNDRIP into our laws. Now we're in the process of implementing. And now we're in the second year of that implementation. We have a report that was released in June where it's tracking up on this particular call to action alone, but it's going to take years for us to actually fully implement this recommendation. And there are many such examples. For example, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit individuals. When we took office in 2015, one of the first things we did was to call an inquiry, which was, again, one of the calls to action. Then now we have 231 recommendations that we are in the process of implementing. So none of this, or most of this, is not simple. This is not a tick mark exercise. This is about substantively implementing the calls to action and beyond just the calls to action to ensure that on two fronts. One, we close the gap that exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in terms of social outcomes. The second part of it is about self-determination, to ensure that we are genuinely in the path of self-determination that enables First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to make decisions for themselves. And that's precisely what we've been doing since 2015. And I'm going to suggest that this is work that we will need to continue. This is a one-way street. We cannot go back in the progress we made. But of course, there's still a lot more that we need to do.
No, and I take that point, but the Assembly of First Nation is citing a website called indigenouswatchdog.org, and it says that 36% of the calls to action are either stalled or not started at all. Why is that?
There are many that have been completed, like for example, the National Council on Truth and Reconciliation, and the legislation just passed. We are in the process of appointing the first council. The organization itself is established. We are working through many of these calls to action. It's an all-of-government approach. But make no mistake, we are committed and we are working as hard as we can to implement the calls to action. I'm going to, my travels this summer, I've been able to go across the country numerous times. And one of the things that I heard over and over again is a significant progress that people feel that have been made since 2015. They definitely recognize that there's a lot more work to do, and I would be the first one to acknowledge that. But I think it would be unfair to say that we haven't moved on the vast majority of the calls to action. And this is something that we are absolutely committed to, and we will continue on this path. And any successive government that comes here on forth will have to do the same. This is not something that we can go back on. Reconciliation is a Canadian imperative, and we will have to continue to work together, get provinces to move along in this journey. We need to make sure that institutions that have specific mandates need to do more in terms of addressing some of the systemic issues that confront institutions as well.
And I take your point of what you said that people are telling you, but can you also understand their frustration when you consider that your government was elected in 2015 on a promise of addressing a number of these things, including ending boil water advisories on all First Nations communities by the year 2021. We know that the pandemic did delay that goal, but there are still long-term advisories in 30 communities. What is your deadline to end those now?
Again, those are, if you go to our website, you will see exactly what the plan is for each and every one of those boil water advisories, and for us to be able to get those communities off of the advisories. There's been a marked difference, Mike. I think it would be completely unfair to suggest that we haven't moved significantly over the past 9 years towards reconciliation.
And Minister, just to be clear, I just want to be clear about this. I'm not saying that you haven't moved considerably, but there is still a mountain to climb here. And of course, Indigenous communities have been promised certain things by certain timelines, and they have not been delivered.
Look, and for many of the issues, such as child welfare is probably one of the perfect examples of this. We have a significant path towards delivering on that promise, including a $47.8 billion commitment. And that is work that's happening right now as members of the Assembly of First Nations and others ratify the agreement. We know that we are working, Minister Hyde is working towards ensuring that we have agreements with specific communities to implement child welfare in communities that are self-determined, that are run by communities and nations themselves. This is the type of transformational change that we are working on. And unfortunately, there is no easy fix sometimes. And I fully share the frustration of the pace, but make no mistake, our path towards self-determination and reconciliation is unparalleled, and we will continue to double our efforts in order to achieve substantive changes in equality with nations, Inuit and Métis communities across Canada.
When you consider how focused your government has been on the current cost of living crisis, have calls to action slipped down the list of priorities for the Liberals right now?
If you look at Budget 2024, for example, our commitment is about $32 billion in new spending towards closing the gap and ensuring that we invest in Indigenous communities. And that ranges from additional funds towards infrastructure, ensuring that we're building more housing, ensuring that child welfare is self-determined. Also, just this summer, I initialed, on behalf of the government, 3 new treaties with nations in British Columbia. There are a number of more of those discussions that are ensuing, and we will look forward to concluding them. We also have had 2 sectoral education agreements. So, for example, the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia have been self-determining their education system for over 30 years. The outcomes there have been significantly better than even the provincial outcomes. And we just re-signed a new agreement with them that will enable self-determination over education in Nova Scotia, and we have another one that we will announce in very short order. So, I'm going to suggest that Budget 2024 continued to build on the work that we've done since 2015, and it is significant investments are taking place. And we will continue, and we will not back down. This is an area that is deeply important to our government, to the Prime Minister, to Indigenous people, and to all Canadians. And we do not intend to, nor can we afford to slow down the pace in which work is happening.
Minister, just before we let you go, we want to ask you this last one. We're about to speak to NDP MP Leah Gazan on her private member's bill to criminalize residential school denialism. Will your government support this bill?
Look, residential school denialism is a deeply troubling aspect of what's been happening around Canada and in certain areas. I am deeply troubled by it. I personally, and I won't speak for the government, I personally support criminal code amendment that will essentially ensure that residential school denialism is treated as a hate crime. I haven't had a chance to look at Ms. Gazan's private member's bill, but I look forward to talking to her and to others. As you know, Budget 2024, we have investments that do directly target residential school denialism, and it's an area that is deeply hurtful and troubling to those survivors and their descendants.
So to be clear, you're saying that you will support it, but you're not sure what the rest of the government will do on it.
What I'm saying is that in principle, I think it is important to recognize the harm of residential school denialism, and I have called on it in previous interviews and meetings to have it included in the criminal code. But of course, I haven't seen the legislation, and there's obviously work to do before something like this can be adopted by the government.
Okay, Minister Anandasangaree, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.